Good afternoon. Welcome to the Enterprise Committee, our regularly scheduled meeting for February 6th. My name is Lene Palmisano, and I chair this committee. With me at the dais are committee members, Councilmember Lisa Goodman, Cano, Fletcher, and Reich. We're a quorum of this committee, and we're authorized to do the city's business. Colleagues, on the consent agenda today are 4 items. I'll read them and see if anyone wants to take them off for any reason. And we can discuss those, and as we dispense with that, we have 3 quick discussion items to go through, and I anticipate this meeting will probably take approximately 45 minutes. I know some of you have had a very long meeting this morning at Zoning and Planning. So on our consent agenda today, we have vacation leave benefits for appointed employees. We had robust discussion about this at executive committee, I'm told. Item number 2 is a contract amendment with Abbott for licenses, training, maintenance, and support for our crime lab. Item number 3 is a contract amendment with Verint Americas. This is our call screens application for 311. Item number 4 is a contract with Harris Computer Corporation for implementation, maintenance, and support of our utility billing in the public service building. Do any of my colleagues want to take off any of those items for more discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor of approving those consent agenda items, please signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? That carries. I want to welcome Councilmember Warsame, who's also on this committee, who just joined us. We will now go to our regular city coordinator monthly update. Welcome, Mr. Ruff.
Chair Palmisano, members of the committee, I'm Mark Ruff, interim city coordinator. I have just a few items of an update. One is, we had talked previously about the Drake fire. The Red Cross shelter did close, and we know the county and Pillsbury United, as well as other organizations, including Align in cooperation with First Covenant, are continuing to provide services for those residents. So even though the shelter itself has closed, there's follow-up that has been undertaken. I would also say that we're working towards a recognition of both the Red Cross and the Salvation Army, which provided meals for that facility, and just a thank you from the city in terms of the work that they did above and beyond what they normally would for a disaster shelter of this type. So just some, I wouldn't call it, I would just say in review, we will also be looking generally at how we operate disaster shelters and just our partnership with Red Cross and doing some after action and of learning throughout this whole process. So that's one element of the work that has concluded, at least from the city's portion of the work, revolving around former residents. Certainly that site is something that will be an active consideration, and Councilmember Goodman in her ward will be obviously a key player in that discussion as well. The second area of the coordinator office is just wanted to take an opportunity to review a PowerPoint that we did also review with the executive committee, and that's an establishment of a new position within the coordinators department. And so if I will give me a minute, I will review just a short presentation. As you are all aware, we have 4 departments within the coordinators umbrella, which every day interact with our residents. That is NCR, Communications, 311, and 911. They already informally work together, but to me, much of the action that all of you as a council have taken on focusing on reaching residents who don't normally interact with the city, and that is not just anecdotal information. It is also something that came forward in the communications audit that was undertaken by Padilla recently. It is so the work that you all are doing around reaching residents who don't normally interact with the city, the work that you have asked us to do through staff directions on inventorying all of the types of engagement that the different departments across the city do, and coming up with actually a definition of what engagement is, because we all have our different ideas of what engagement means from the city. And then working towards an engagement policy says that this is a critical issue for you as elected officials. And so this position would be twofold. One, it would then oversee these 4 departments. So instead, right now, the coordinator has 12 direct reports, which include both departments and staff within the coordinator's office. So 4 of those direct reports would instead go to a new position, a deputy position. So that position would, I think, not only bring a benefit towards some clarity, but would be able to talk about best practices and a more effective methodology across the enterprise that isn't going to be one size fits all, because clearly how the health department engages with residents is very different than Public Works and is very different than CPID. But there are elements, I think, of the city where we have undertaken engagement the same way for 20 or 30 years. And clearly over the last decade, the way that people communicate has changed dramatically, right? And we have some areas where we are certainly moving forward. The new website's an example of that, but there are many other ways that we can be more actively interacting with our residents. I think the other area is also to serve as a resource for you as elected officials in terms of engagement process. I know I hear regularly that you all take the hard questions in your offices. You all would like to be more proactive in some of that engagement rather than reactive. And while I don't want to overpromise on what this position can do, I think there is a place for this position to provide some expertise in that arena as well. I mentioned a little earlier about why now. I just want to list formally all of the things that are happening that address engagement. And I would, for those of you who sit on TPW, the Transportation Action Plan is one of those big ones. What happened last year with 2040 certainly was one of those large events, and the implementation will be a multi-month, multi-year process, as well as the new building and the public service element of the new building is an important component of this discussion. And some of the employees who will actually be working in there, I would see report up through this deputy. I think we always have to ask ourselves, and it seems like every time we have a problem in the city, we solve it by creating a new FTE, right? And that's not always the best way. But in this case, I think it is. And I would say one of the reasons that the effectiveness has been diminished is because we ask too much of coordinators and have in the past. That's not a criticism of our recent coordinators. It is just a function, as I said, of higher expectation level. And if we have a coordinator who has 12 direct reports, is responsible for 14 elected officials, and then also working with charter departments and outside entities, I think it's that these departments are not going to get the attention that they need. And then indirectly, the residents are not going to get the attention if they're always waiting for a coordinator to make a decision. So that is an area that I see as great room for improvement that really puts a lot of pressure on the person we select in this position and what kind of skills they have, because they have to be able to both a great manager and be able to walk into any room around the city and be comfortable in communicating with those folks. And so I'm excited about this opportunity, and we are moving through in the approval process. So this position has been approved by the executive committee. It is on the Ways and Means agenda for next Tuesday, and be happy to answer any more questions that you may have.
Questions or comments from my colleagues? I'm not seeing any. I will note that some of the things that you describe here help to address concerns that were raised in the communications audit that we underwent as well as a city, in terms of the kinds of things that people do learn from the city and the ways that people go about seeking information from the city. This seems like a good direction. So thank you.
Thank you.
We also have, we usually highlight a part of the coordinator's office in each of these coordinator updates. And today's highlight, I believe, will be Jody Molinar Hansen. Welcome.
Good afternoon, Chair Palmisano, committee members. I'm here to provide an update on the city's continuous, or I should say my work on continuous improvement. I'm going to quickly go over, introduce myself, my work, highlight the history of continuous improvement, talk about what continuous improvement is, provide some observations I've had in the 12 plus years I've been in this position, and then quickly just talk about some of my current work, and then stand for questions if there are any. So I'm the manager, Jody Molnar-Hansen, the manager of continuous improvement. As I noted, I lead and support the city's continuous improvement efforts by using an internal consultant model. And I do that through providing capacity building and technical assistance. Some of the capacity building I provide is problem solving for departments, facilitation, help people challenge some of the existing assumptions to make some changes. I help people see their work through the experiences of their customers, better utilize existing resources, help them clarify what they're trying to achieve, and work with them to provide options on how to achieve that, especially if we can do that, finding ways to utilize existing resources. And then the technical assistance is providing tools, techniques, resources, making connections, building relationships, mentoring, coaching, and providing consultations. I also used to provide training to city staff, but now focusing more on the capacity building. My approach is to meet people where they're at. I build trust through working with people through appreciative inquiry, also known as judge less, understand more, set and meet expectations and adjusting those as needed, and then try to keep a sense of humor and a positive outlook as we work together through these challenges. The initiative was created in 2007. It was originally called Business Process Improvement, or BPI, and some people still refer to that. But they quickly brought into focus on other things, such as helping departments with strategies, performance, their programs and initiatives, looking at employee engagement and community engagement, focusing on policies and procedures, and as I noted, coaching and mentoring. And so updated the name to better reflect that, to be called Continuous Improvement in 2010. Just a highlight of some of the approaches that we used when we first kicked off this initiative. We contracted with Ken Miller from the Change and Innovation Agency. We don't make widgets. He helped us understand how to do process mapping, learn about the voice of the customer, how to identify bottlenecks, batches, and backlogs. He talked a lot about that the problem isn't the problem, so the solution isn't the solution, and that the government, we do make widgets, but our widgets tend to be in forms, in inspections, in reports, in ordinances. We actually do have customers, and that we are here to make a profit, but our profit is in the accomplishment of our goals. We also dabbled a bit into lean concepts and Kaizen events, which taught us how to create mistake proofing within our processes to make them easier for people to go through, and really the importance of utilizing employees who work in the processes to help have their perspectives included in identifying those opportunities for improvement. We also utilize systematic inventive thinking, or SIT. Their focus was really to utilize constraints, foster creativity, so thinking inside of the box instead of outside of the box. They helped us understand how functional and structural fixedness gets in our way, because once we create a process or a program, it's hard for us to think about it any way differently. So they provided us with thinking tools such as subtraction, division, and task unification. I'll give a quick example. For a lot of us who drink cream in our coffee, we tend to pour the coffee, pour the cream in, and then use a stir stick to stir the cream and the coffee together. Subtraction would have us look at that process to say, what would happen if we removed the stir stick? Division would have us look at maybe moving some of our steps around. So a way to solve that would be pour the cream in the coffee cup, pour the coffee then into the cup. The action of pouring the coffee into the cup, it takes on the role of the stir stick, which is essentially task unification. So utilizing those concepts in our processes and procedures to help us think differently. Again, really looking at what existing resources do we have to make these changes. And then finally, ProSci and change management. So we've gone through the work of identifying opportunities for improvement. We've put them together, but now we need to bring people along in understanding those changes. And ProSci does that through what they call ADCAR, awareness, desire, knowledge, ability, and reinforcement. And so people need to understand how the change and when the change is going to impact them. So they might have awareness about the change, but they might not have the knowledge and ability. And this model helps us kind of figure out and target where to focus those resources on and those efforts. This is just an example of some of the projects I've worked on in the past 12 years. I'm not going to dive into them today. And defining continuous improvement. So continuous improvement is the ongoing improvement of products, services, processes, programs through incremental and breakthrough improvements. Listed here are a variety of different methods that kind of follow this same Plan, Do, Check, Act that was created in 1939. Some methods might have a few more steps or are identify the steps a bit differently, but it is essentially all the same. You plan for that change, you do the change, you check to see did that change get the results you were anticipating, and then you act upon those if you didn't. So creating that Plan, Do, Check, Act cycle. How I define continuous improvement is essentially just to help people do things better so they can do better things. Albert Einstein has this great quote that we cannot solve our problems with the same thinking we used to create them, so really helping people think differently. And earlier I mentioned help challenge assumptions. It turns out Albert Einstein never said this, but I still like the quote anyway. Okay, sorry. My slides are out of order here. So I'm going to talk about my observations and then get back to my current work. So through the years of working on this process, I've come across quite a few different observations, one of which is that we do have the collective wisdom to solve our problems and improve our outcomes, but most of the time we usually don't have the time to actually do that. Many solutions, as I noted, can be implemented using existing resources. That technology is a tool, not a solution. Sometimes we look at it as a solution, and then we forget to look at kind of how that tool best fits the problem that we're trying to solve. The importance of defining words that you're using when you're talking about your program or your process. It's come up in several different projects where we find out people are using the same word and they're actually talking about different things. And that finally, our biggest asset is our employees, which we tend to overlook. So my current work. Currently I'm providing project support to NCR for the 2020 census. In doing that work, it led to working with Cassidy Gardenier in the Civil Rights Equity Division to help her implement her census experience at the recent Community Connections Conference. And in putting that project together, we found out that she needed additional assistance to help execute her idea. So we connected with the Minneapolis Promise Zone, Julianne Learson, and the AmeriCorps Vistas, and they were able to help us put together a whole bunch of maps outlining hard-to-count areas that are hard to count for the census. They put together these amazing profiles of people in North Minneapolis talking about why the census is important to them. And now we're taking that work and we're working collaboratively to figure out how we can improve participation in North Minneapolis for the 2020 census, looking at expanding that collaboration to include community groups and other city staff. And then finally, working with the city clerk in the upcoming redistricting for 2021. It's a nice segue between the census work and how that is actually going to come into the next part of it, which is the redistricting. And with that, seeing if you have any questions for me.
Thank you. Questions or comments from my colleagues? I'm not seeing any. I did want to give my colleagues just a really tangible example of your work that we use every day. So I'm going to call on our city clerk, Casey Carl, to just say a few words about LIMS and Jody's work with LIMS.
Thank you, Madam Chair. As I said at the agenda setting, when I came in 2010, one of the things I was charged with was improving the council's process through an automated system. And we brought in Jody early on, who helped the clerk's office understand our own process first and really challenged us to not be so stuck and fixed in our thinking of how that process works. She encouraged us through her tools to think inside and outside the box, and worked with us over the course of a year to document what is the city's legislative process. It was highly complex, and her work then set the stage for the launch of our legislative information management system that we use today. And we wouldn't have been able to do that without her help. When you're too close to your work, sometimes you don't understand how it fits into a bigger picture. So she was instrumental in helping us set the stage for LIMS. The other thing I noticed on her slide, Madam Chair, very quickly, Jody played a big role in ranked choice voting in the city of Minneapolis that I don't think she ever gets publicly credited with. When that was passed in 2006 for the first implementation in 2009, initial tests by the election office showed that it would probably take anywhere from 5 to 6 months to complete a hand count of ballots. So remember in 2009, we had to hand count all of our ballots. That meant we would not have been done with the count by the end of the year. It would have been, February, March of the following year before we had results done. That was unacceptable to everyone in the city, and our elections office was really stumped on what to do. And she led a series of Kaizen events, and again, thinking through, do you have to do it a certain way? Are you too fixed in your approach to how you're handling these ballots? And because of that, we were actually able to do the entire election in 15 days, hand counting every single ballot multiple times. But she developed, in partnership with the elections office, what we called the Minneapolis method. That method is still in place today. It's just been automated in partnership with our vendors, and is now the model that other cities across the nation are looking at when they implement RCV, or ranked choice voting. They're using the Minneapolis method, which Jody Mulliner-Hansen developed for us. So she has been instrumental in a very behind the scenes, not a lot of attribution, very little credit, but doing a lot of good work, as she said, to enable us on the front end to do even better work. And we've had very good collaborations with her. So thank you for giving me that chance to say that, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Thanks, Jody, for your work. I appreciate it.
I also want to mention, we do have a few extra books at Ken Miller. We don't make widgets, and the city clerk has them if anyone would like to take them. Thank you very much.
Super. Thank you very much. Next on our agenda is the data privacy principles, and to cue it up and to give it all the context that it deserves, I'm going to, is he going to come and present at the presenter's box? I will welcome our colleague Steve Fletcher up to cue up data privacy principles and tell us a little bit about your work efforts on this initiative. Welcome.
Thank you very much, Chair Palmisano, and I'm excited to be able to present this. And I just wanted to give a little bit of context about how we got to where we are. So think back to the very beginning of this term. And a couple of things happened right away when I got into office. One was the Super Bowl and a whole lot of new technology coming in without a lot of discussion around both the marketing and the surveillance of what was happening around in and around the stadium in my ward. And I started asking questions about it. And then we also had a whole lot of technology vendors coming through, especially the new council members' offices, who didn't know to say no to every vendor meeting we were being asked for yet. And they were pitching us on some genuinely terrifying technology that would have really absorbed a lot of data about our residents without their permission or knowledge in a lot of cases. And so as we saw this, I started asking questions about it. And many of you have been on the dais with me in this committee, at TPW, in public safety, when I've raised data privacy questions repeatedly. And often what we've seen is that, there is good work happening at the city. We do not need to be panicked about how data has been managed, because good decisions by individual department heads have been made in most cases, but there was not a consistent approach to it that we could feel confident in and that we could really understand how we were making decisions. And that's important because increasingly data is how we make decisions. We talk about data-driven decision-making all the time, and we can be a smarter city if we have more access to data. And for people to trust us with that data, they have to know that we're going to manage it in a responsible way. And so it's in terms of improving the experience of the users of our city, our residents, our businesses, our visitors. We want to be able to embrace technology. We want to be prepared for the future. And that means that we need to have policies in place about how we manage data. The good news is, when I started asking around about this was already on the agenda. Last term, there had been an audit of our data practices generally that had identified data privacy as one of the many areas that we wanted to look at and improve. So this was on the agenda, and I sort of prompted us to move it forward on the agenda. As I started talking about it, I heard from a lot of advocates, some of whom were in the room. So thank you, everybody who's participated in this and contributed to the conversation. And we were able to move this forward. The Information Governance Policy Committee worked on a draft that got us to a place that we could take something to advocates and technology experts around the community who care deeply about this. We consulted with department leadership, and we analyzed state and federal law to figure out what we can do. And we talked to cities that have passed similar policies to see what was working. And as we did all of that, we've finally gotten to a point that we are today, which is that we can now officially, for the first time together, say that data privacy is something that we value in this city. Say that this is something that should be considered when we're adopting new processes, when we're adopting new technologies that will use people's personally identifiable data. And so to present what the actual principles are and give a little more background and context on this, I want to turn it over with a lot of gratitude to the clerk's office and just recognize the work of several people, Casey Carl, folks in the city attorney's office, Susan Trammell and Susan Siegel, before she left us to put on the judge robes. And especially Christian Rummelhoff has worked very hard on this policy, and I appreciate your presentation here.
Thank you.
Thank you. Welcome, Mr. Rummelhoff.
Thank you. Chair Palmisano, committee members, I'm Christian Rummelhoff. I lead the Records and Information Management Division in the Clerk's Office. So I'm here to talk a little bit about the data privacy principles that Councilmember Fletcher just set up. One of the things I'd like to kind of explain is why principles first. This isn't a policy, it's not a procedure, it's not a how to do something. It's really a set of 8 high-level statements that describe the city's values about how we interact with data, especially data that can be associated with individuals. They're stated as high-level principles because they're meant to shape decisions around the city, and they're meant to last a significant amount of time. They involve the very different work done by all 22 departments and involve changing technology. As principles, they're aspirational. Adopting them marks a path we'll follow, but it's the start of the journey. It's not the end. It's going to take some time, but over time, the work of the city will be increasingly reflect the principles. One value of having principles is they're a tool for communication. We can talk amongst ourselves, we can share the values of city staff and across all the departments, but we can also share these values with the public. So they allow us to talk about what we think, how we think we should value data. Another important thing is that the privacy principles aren't the complete story on data. Privacy is only part of the story. We have multiple values associated with data. We value transparency in its ability to facilitate public oversight of the government. We seek to be smarter. We want to leverage data. We want to learn from it so we can effectively and efficiently achieve our outcomes and objectives. By adopting privacy principles, we're not diminishing these other values. Rather, we're ensuring that we bring that perspective to the table whenever we're considering data. So there are 2 more things I want to say about privacy. And as Councilmember Fletcher indicated, this today isn't the start of privacy at the city. A lot of great work has been going on. City departments are well aware of the importance of privacy, and there's been a lot of great work over time that's happened. The principles aren't meant to limit or change that work, but rather to leverage it and extend it so that we have a consistent set of values that we're working from. The other point Councilmember Fletcher also referenced is that the state law takes up a lot of space in this room of privacy. There's only so much that we as a city can do. We have to live within the bounds of the law that's set out for us. For example, the Official Records Act tells us that we have to create documentation documenting our actions. The Records Management Statute says how we have to keep that, how we retain it. And the Data Practices Act classifies that data It says some of that data is available to anyone who asks for it, while other data we can protect. So the principles are meant to work with the existing laws, and they echo many of the elements within those laws. But they're not just meant to restate what's already out there. They do extend some of the elements of the law, and they provide more context around others. And maybe most importantly, it's different for the city council to say, follow state law. It's something more for the elected leadership of the city to say, we recognize the importance of privacy, and we direct you, the staff, to do the same. So with that context, before diving into what the principles are, I want to talk a little bit about the development of them. Very briefly, because they're shared values, it was important they reflected perspectives from across the city. So what you see on this slide is the people on this slide and the departments and the public listed here. I get to present the hard work of this group. I really want to call out Councilmember Fletcher as the driving force here, also Ward 3 staff, but also the attorney's office, the coordinator, staff in the clerk's office, health, human resources, the auditor, public works, and then many, many experts in our IT department were instrumental in drafting these. Beyond that group of people contributing directly to the drafting, all 22 departments had a chance to provide input and were very helpful. Apologies if I missed anyone on that slide. So what you see now are the principles stated. I've spent most of my time going through the context because I think the principles in some ways stand for themselves. I'm not going to go through them one by one and talk about the detail behind them. But I do want to talk a bit about what they, as a group, the effect that they should have. So together, they're a clear statement on the importance that the city places on privacy. But at the same time, they avoid elevating privacy over other values. They encourage us to act deliberatively and to make thoughtful choices about data, rather than just moving forward with a new technology or a new tool without considering potential consequences. They embrace data minimization, and that means they recognize that we should gather and keep the data that we need to do our work, but we shouldn't stockpile it indefinitely or gather it without purpose, especially when it's about individuals. They require transparency, informing the public about how we use data and what their rights are. And they uphold these values in our work outside the city with others, with partners, with vendors, and others outside the city. So just adopting the principles will have an impact because it's guidance to staff to include privacy in all future decision making. But there's another helpful impact, which is they provide a foundation for future work on privacy within the city. So this may be the routine work of the city as we acquire technology, as we design our business processes, but it also can include specific initiatives related to privacy. So there may be ordinances, policies, procedures that are more focused on specific areas of privacy. In the development of those, we should recognize that these principles underlay the objectives there. So I've reached the end of my prepared statements, but hopefully that gives you some of the context of the principles, but I'm happy to take any questions or go into a specific principle if there's any questions or concerns.
I'm not seeing any questions or comments from my colleagues up here, but I'll give up the floor to my colleague, Councilmember Fletcher, to close here.
Thank you, Chair Palmisano, again. So just to foreshadow a little bit of what kinds of work this might lead to, I think there's real potential in several areas. The first is going to be in the implementation, and we all have roles in our committees in asking questions about how is this actually getting implemented at the policy level? How are we actually kind of putting these into action? And then I think the second is to really continue the really great work where it is happening. And I want to particularly shout out the way Public Works is anonymizing data in their mobility tracking so that we can get really terrific data to help with decision making around things like scooters without ever having the personally identifiable information that underlies it, we have other cities asking us how we did it and asking us for advice on implementing it the way we have. So we have an opportunity to really lift up good work that's happening. There's going to be some specific policies. There's actually nothing controversial in these principles as far as I can tell from my conversations with all of you. But this certainly leads to some more robust conversations that we're going to need to have about specific technologies. So things like facial recognition and biometrics, things like how do we use personal identifiable information and machine learning and automated decision making. And some of our advocacy at the state around our lobbying agenda, hopefully this provides us with a clearer platform and framework for us to make decisions about that in the future. Those things aren't happening today, but today, by adopting these principles, we say this is something that's important and that we're going to do future work on. So I'm excited to do that work with you, and I'm excited to pass this today. And if I may, I'll move the principles for adoption.
Councilmember Fletcher, come on back here so you can vote. Councilmember Fletcher has moved the resolution on adopting these data privacy principles. Is there any discussion? Seeing none, all those in approval, please signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? That item carries. We also didn't take an action on the city coordinator's monthly update. We always receive and file that, so I will move that for approval. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? That carries. Colleagues, the last item is, we don't need to go through it unless there are questions. Mr. Rummelhoff is happy to answer some of these questions, but something that we've been having discussion about internally in a complementary way, I'd like to utilize the regularity and opportunity that I see in this being an enterprise committee that's focused on enterprise-wide things, is in solving enterprise-wide problems. And to that end, I'd like us to embark on regular reporting from here about our open data practices. The staff direction is before you, and it's about directing the city clerk's Records and Information Unit division to present a recurring report at our monthly enterprise meetings. Does anyone have any questions about that? It would not start until next month. Seeing none, all those in favor, please signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? That item carries. There's one more item I wanted to briefly go back to, and I might need the city clerk's help in helping us do this. On our item number 1, our consent agenda, the vacation leave benefits for appointed employees. At agenda setting, we spoke about the need to have a fiscal note with this. It's important for us to see the budgetary impact, and I didn't bring my computer. I just had all the papers here. I understand that fiscal note is not yet completed, and so I would like to see that again at Ways and Means. We've already adopted it as a consent agenda item, but is it possible for me to make a motion, Madam Clerk, to also have it come to Ways and Means with my colleague, Councilmember Warsami's permission, just so that we can make sure we get that fiscal note attached?
Sure.
So I will move that to
Refer to Ways and Means.
refer item number 1, the vacation leave benefits for appointed employees, to Ways and Means this cycle. All those in favor of that, please signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? That carries. Colleagues, with our agenda complete, we'll stand adjourned. Thank you.